Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Shani, and I'm the Industry Development Coordinator here at Manitoba Music. And I would like to thank everybody for joining us here today, right now, for our second installment of our Gear Up series. The Gear Up series is a series that's featuring prominent women engineers and producers. The virtual speakers series aims to create connections with aspiring women and non-binary audio engineers and producers and established professionals alike, and to build awareness of the issues in the music community through discussions of career journeys, creative and business mentorship, and lived experiences. We're also going to get a lot of nice technical treats and learning some secrets, production secrets, and some wizardry that I'm really excited about. The Gear Up series, the Gear Up Speaker Series, is made possible by the support of Factor and Manitoba Film and Music. And today we're joined by two amazing artists, and I'm really excited to have them here. So today we're joined by Hill Kourkoutis and Sierra Noble. Hill is a revered Canadian music contributor. She is an accomplished producer, songwriter, composer, artist, musician, and director. Spanning her career, Hill has produced and or written albums and or singles for the 2021 JUNO-winning Indigenous Artist of the Year, Leela Gilday, Royalwood, Cassie, Jules, Posey, Digging Roots, Amanda Rayom, and Sate. Hill played on and produced and mixed Leela Gilday's Juno Award-winning album. Wonderful. Hill has produced and co-wrote the theme song and the end title for Universal Kids animated series Remy and Boo, which was one of the overall top 3 premieres of 2020. Hill also produced and co-wrote the theme song for Disney's preschool series Diamond Ranch, which was the #1 rated preschool series in the United States. Well, the last thing, there was a bit more in here, but I kind of wanted to skip to the last little part, which is Hill also kind of broke history by recently becoming the first woman to be nominated to get a Juno nom for Recording Engineer of the Year. So that's a huge deal. And having the conversation will be none other than our own member, Sierra Noble. Sierra is a Winnipeg singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and producer. Sierra has opened for Paul McCartney, Bon Jovi, and Johnny Reid, and was a featured performer for the 2010 Winter Olympics opening ceremony. Noble's original music has been included in TV shows such as One Tree Hill, Switched at Birth, and Parenthood, and in films such as CBC's Humboldt, The New Season, 40 Weeks, and Fostering Hope. Okay, there you go. We got it. We've got everybody introduced. I'm really excited to have this happen, and it's going to be a really great conversation. So we're going to get to that. I just also want to, I'm going to give everybody a chance to get on screen here, and they're going to take it over. I just want to make sure that everybody's excited for this, as I am, so I'm happy that everybody had a chance to join us. I also want to make sure that we are recognizing that Manitoba Music was founded on Treaty 1 territory, which is the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'd like to recognize a strong Inuit community here in Manitoba. Manitoba Music respects the treaty in which our organization resides, and we commit to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of collaboration and reconciliation. All right, I'm on the screen by myself, and by the magic of technology, I am no longer by myself. I am joined by, whoa, look at that, Sierra and Hill. And my next trick is going to be even more spectacular. Trick 1, make my guests appear. Trick 2, make myself disappear. So on the count of 3, Isabella, 1, 2, 3.
That was wild.
Hi, Alex. Shout out to Isabella behind the scenes making all of this happen. Thank you, Isabella. Hey, Hill, how you doing?
I'm good, Sierra. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is really exciting. You know, people have been really excited to hear from you. Congratulations on the Juno nom.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
How does that feel? What are all the feelings?
It was very unexpected, but I feel really excited about it. It's a great honor, and yeah, and hopefully it's the first of many to come for women and non-binary folks. So yeah, I'm excited for the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I want to say congratulations for being the first non-man to be nominated, but also just as an engineer.
Yeah,
Because that's just no matter what, it's a huge deal. So
pretty fun. Yeah, no,
yeah.
It's definitely a great honor.
That's awesome. So you are incredibly multi-talented. You're a songwriter, a badass musician, producer, engineer. How did you get your start? Where did it all start for you?
It's loaded because I've had a very non-linear trajectory, I feel like. But I started like all of us as a 12-year-old dreaming of having an all-girl band and playing stadiums, like the Go-Go's. That's how I started.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started my first band at my all-girls school with a bunch of girls in my class. And then by the next year, I started playing the dingy clubs in Toronto, accompanied by my mom. And then, so I was writing the songs and like playing guitar in that first band. And then I started exploring other instruments around that time. And I taught myself how to play bass and drums. And I took piano lessons. And then eventually people started asking me to write songs for them or to play in their band. So then I started to do that. And then, towards the end of high school, I started to tour. And it was also around that same time that I started exploring production, like essentially in my bedroom with a laptop. Because I had been inspired by the first gentleman that had produced my all-girl band when we were 12. His name was Andrew Franey. He was in a really awesome indie band called Smoother. And he showed me that you could carry a giant PC around and record people in their basements. He actually was carrying the whole computer around, by the way, with a laptop. And he just had an SM58 and he was like recording us playing in my parents' basement. And then so I was inspired to do that with a laptop, and I started off with a computer mic, and I found Fruity Loops, which at the time was just like a drum machine software.
Yeah.
So I was making my own beats and Fruity Loops and like just recording every instrument that I had through an SM58 and computer mic. And then eventually I graduated to the Pro Tools rig. Nice. And then I just kept going from there. So, but it's been kind of all over the place. And then I had a stint in film school.
Cool.
Where I did that, and I started directing music videos around that time. So all those things have kind of informed where I've landed in production and songwriting.
That's so awesome. Yeah. I didn't realize that you started so young, and that's awesome. I also started really young, and
you did. I know, your first record.
It's a bit of a blessing and a curse, right? It's a weird life to have.
Because sometimes people just remember you as that 12-year-old person.
Totally.
It takes a while to be like,
very
turn up now.
Yeah. Did you find that starting so young and even getting into production so young, or like how did people react to you being so young, like not just being a girl but being a really young girl, saying that you're a producer?
I mean, at first, because I was producing myself, people kind of weren't sure about it. Like they thought that maybe it was a gimmick to make my project seem cooler. So that was an interesting thing to overcome. But luckily, once I started to get into studios more and just work with more of my peers, like people were kind of, bigging me up to others about what I was working on and stuff. So I felt like it wasn't that shocking. I feel like I had a harder time, honestly, being a director on film sets.
Oh, interesting.
Like I would always show up on my sets and people would be like, here, grab this light, start moving. And I'd be like, okay. And so I do it, but then they discover I was the director and I was like,
right. Joke's on you.
It's not even a joke, but it's like, there was definitely an ageism, I think, that was hard to overcome and be taken seriously. But I think it's like similar to a lot of our experiences. Once we are actually in that space and we're able to prove ourselves and, talk our talk, then I think that quickly shifts,
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. When did you start working with, when did you start producing other artists? As this is something that I'm just starting to do. And it's super exciting, but also like scary sometimes. So
It's always scary. I'm always
journey?
terrified. I'm trying to remember the exact moment because it kind of happened really organically. Like I just started kind of making my own demos. And it was really out of lack of resources. Like I didn't have budgets to pay other producers, or once I get into the room with producers, I felt like it wasn't sounding the way I heard it in my mind. So I kind of, took the initiative to start doing that. And then around that same time, once I started making things that didn't sound completely shitty, then some of my friends were like, oh, that's interesting. Do you mind recording this demo of a new song that I did? And I think it must have been like around the age, I must have been around 18 or so. And it just slowly, snowballed from there. A lot of my initial production gigs actually came out of songwriting sessions where I would just work on the demo.
Right.
And then people would be like, oh, I really like the direction you took that in. Do you want to finish it?
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, it just kind of happened like that. And because I was balancing a lot of different things, it was always just one of the things that I was doing. Yeah. But then when I really made the choice to give it my all 100%, that's when things started to really amp up.
That's awesome. Very cool. Who have been some of your favorite mentors, or who have you learned the most from, or your favorite things from?
Well, there's been the ones that I haven't met, and then there's been the ones that I've met. I'll start with the ones that I met, because I've been really fortunate to have a lot of great mentors. One of my first mentors actually was one of my first professional co-writing sessions when I was 14. And it was with Lisa Del Bello, or Del Bello as she's known as an artist. And she was one of my biggest inspirations. I remember being like so excited and scared to enter a space with her, because I'm just like, you're a genius.
That's awesome.
But yeah, she started producing her own records, in the 80s, and had to create a pseudonym to make her name sound like a man's name to convince EMI that, this is the producer of the record, and it was all her. And then the joke was on them when they heard the record, and they're like, wow, this Bill guy did an awesome job. And she's like, I'm Bill.
That's so amazing.
So yeah, she was one of my main inspirations and mentors, and she's given me a lot of really great advice over the years. And another one of my champions was my late friend Tim Thorney. He's actually a Winnipeg fellow. Oh, awesome. And Tim, for some reason, just heard my music one day and believed in me. And ever since that first day that he reached out, like, he really threw every opportunity my way, and also got me into the film and TV world with composing, which was amazing. But yeah, he's another one of my huge mentors. And he just taught me about working hard and taking every single opportunity that came your way, just to really try to figure out what your rhythm is and what you can contribute into this landscape. And so I really became mindful of that through Tim, is just becoming very consciously aware of what I could bring forth to community and what my purpose is and what my role is as a producer, which I think is important to figure out, because I think all of us have our own styles of production, and trying to pair what we can do with the right project, I think, is when magic happens,
Totally.
Because there's complete trust, creative trust and personal trust. So yeah, I learned that from Tim.
Can you talk a bit more about what you feel it is that you bring that is unique to your community and to the artists that you work with?
Well, I think I've always been super sensitive to the artist spirit. I think just being an artist and being in those spaces, I know what it feels like to be heard versus not heard. Yeah. And that feeling of wanting to close yourself off in the process of being vulnerable versus feeling comfortable enough to open up and flourish and find your voice. And so I think I made a really conscious effort. And this is partially personality, I think, because I think a lot of us being artists are innately empathic. I really wanted to be conscious of empathy, but also just take a really, truly holistic approach when it came to being in rooms with artists and trying to become really aware of what it was that they wanted out of their process, and then be a true facilitator and ally in helping them achieve that. So that is what I believe is my job. And also just now that more of us are emerging, is just fostering community, because I don't know about your experience, but for me, it's been I've always felt kind of like I was on the fringe for a very long time, and that I was kind of a lone wolf, for lack of a better word. And in finding this community in the last few years, like, we're all kind of finding each other, and I find that it's been such an amazing way to connect and empower each other and amplify each other. So I think that's a big part of my focus moving forward as well.
Amazing. Same all around. Yeah. I think lately, especially in the last year, I was a part of the Women in the Studio program through MPC. And so we got to learn from a lot of mentors and hear from them. And you're probably like the sixth female or like female socialized person that I've heard say the same thing about being in the studio, and like about the traits of being empathetic and being able to tune in to the artist, but also being able to really connect with that experience of feeling not heard and not listened to, and really prioritizing that. And I think that, that natural empathy that women have, and I think just people who have been marginalized in their life, I think makes you much more empathetic. But that is, those traits I think are so invaluable in the studio. And I'm so glad that, like you said, more of us are doing this, because it'll make the studio experience for artists, no matter who they are, so much better.
Yeah, I mean, because we're all just trying to support storytelling, or, and it's just one of those things that I feel that that's been taken away from it. Like, it's become such an either business oriented thing of like, I want to sound a certain way because that's going to lead to success. And for me, it's always been about how to follow your truth and how to honor that truth, because I truly do believe if an artist chooses the path of their truth, it might take time, but it always ends up paying off. If you're being genuine, it will pay off, and you'll find yourself in the space that you're supposed to be and in alignment with all those things. So, and I do think that was kind of lacking in a lot of studio environments that I had been in anyway. So I mean, I think this is a time in the world too, where storytelling and truth is so important, and I think I feel really responsible for staying true to that as well, and because we are in a world that's very siloed and disconnected right now, and music is really one of the truest ways to is the truest way to bring people together.
Absolutely. You're awesome.
Oh, darn, you're awesome too.
Okay, so we talked a bit before we started this, and we agreed that we would not just talk about gender the whole time, because
it's fine if we do. But we can talk about gender too.
Most of us here, I think, are probably women and non-binary folks, and we know exactly what it's like to be that in this world. So
we don't need to talk about it.
We don't need to do a masterclass on that. So let's get into some like techie stuff. Awesome. Or process, workflow, whatever.
For sure.
I would love to pick your brain about production, especially to start, I guess. What is your workflow like? Do you have a go-to workflow that you kind of work off of or end up falling into every time, or is it different every time?
It's a mix of both, for sure. I work in Pro Tools primarily. That's my preferred DAW, just because I can use it with my eyes closed. Although I did have to use Logic on a project last year, and it was like, it kept me on the edge of my seat. I felt like I was on a roller coaster the whole time, which I think
I'm trying to learn.
Yourself.
Yeah, totally. I'm trying to learn Logic and Ableton just to be able to switch if needed, but Pro Tools is still my comfort.
Yeah, I mean, they all have like their pros and cons. For Pro Tools, it's just really a comfort thing. But I actually, when I was making one of my first records, was switching between Ableton, Logic, and Pro Tools, because Ableton was where I could do MIDI mapping for drum programming. Yeah. Logic was really great for the MIDI stuff, and then Pro Tools for the editing and like all the mixing, right?
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah, now I can do most of that in Pro Tools because they've caught up.
Yeah.
Or I've found, certain plugins, like for example, like there's a plugin that Slate makes called Trigger that is really great if you want to do like sample replacement on acoustic drums, because I love to add samples to drums. Because for me, it's about creating a stylization, right? Like every project I go to, this is where it changes every time. The workflow, I take a long time before I start a project dating the artist, not in a romantic way. It's completely platonic, but I want to get to know the artist because at the end of the day, you're making a record that needs to be 100% them. And part of me being a facilitator is understanding the artist's language. So we have a lot of meetings, a lot of listening to playlists and all that stuff. And I kind of start to deconstruct, okay, what is your definition of edgy, for example? Because that's such, like, music is described in abstract words. And you're like, and I always use this example, but like edgy to some people is hardcore metal and edgy to some people is Kenny G. And it's like, so what side of the spectrum or throughout are you on when it comes to edginess, right? So we just take some time to get to know that. And I also really like to just kind of theorize, what palette are we going to draw from? Because I think of producing as a painting, right? We're just layering textures and colors on top of stuff. And I personally, especially when I'm working on an album, like to think about the cohesion of that album. How is the story going to weave itself from beginning to end? Because everything's about the song at the end of the day, but how do we then use these different colors and textures to enhance the storytelling? So we do talk about palette a lot, what instruments we're going to use. I figure out what instruments they don't like, because then I'm just sure to keep that out of the mix. A lot of the time when I'm building a track, we're not always working with a band. So I end up building and playing most of the instruments myself. So yeah, it's like, that's where the workflow varies, in that I will create certain templates based on what is required of the sonic landscape, you know. And sometimes we need live drums, but even when I record live drums, there needs to be a stylized element to it. Like, what is it going to sound like, right? How are all these sounds going to mix together? What keyboard palette are we going to go? What keyboards and what banks in those keyboards are we going to draw from to create that cohesion from song to song? So yeah, it's pretty much stuff like that. What effects are we going to use? And then it's really just not overthinking it and feeling the music and then diving straight into it. Like, I try not to get into an editing headspace until the end of the process, you know, after all the ideas have come out.
Cool. How long do you usually, date your artist, artistically date the artist?
It depends, because it's usually a slow thing. Like with a lot of the artists I work with, either already have some sort of a pre-existing relationship with, but it's a minimum, at least a few really long conversations. Like in the old days, it would be going out for dinner or a bunch of coffees and just talking about life and art and getting to know each other as friends, because I also think that process is integral to building trust and respect, which to me is the foundation of any relationship, and communication, right? So that once we're in that space, usually with a record, I also like to ask the question, what's your personal goal and what's your professional goal? Because artists always, with the next piece of art, they're trying to do something that's different. That's either a challenge for them or something to overcome. Whether it's, I want to learn how to sing from a more vulnerable place, or I want to be confident, really singing lyrics that are truly like not being masked by like floral words or whatever, but like I want to get to the essence of what I'm trying to say. There's always something like that. Or I want to go into this direction sonically, whatever that is. And then there is the professional goal, which is, this is what I want this record or song to do for me. These are the doors I want it to open up. This is how I want to be able to grow as an artist in the business. So we go through all that kind of stuff, and I'm taking notes on all this stuff, because then once we're in the record, part of my job is to ensure that that stuff is being kept on track and that we're not getting off track from that ultimate goal. But then also, when we've built trust and respect and we're friends, then I think taking risks and going into those vulnerable places comes a lot easier than if you're, just walking into a room and then all of a sudden you're supposed to spill your guts out of nowhere. And it's like, to a stranger, it's not very comfortable, right? So yeah, that's really important.
So many artists end up in those situations.
They do.
And it's like, when you don't know anything else, it's just like, I guess this is what making music is. It kind of sucks.
That's what writing sessions are like too. And one of my friends was joking about this the other day, but they're like, you never just like go and write the song. And I'm like, no, I want to talk for like 3 hours before we actually write the song, especially if I don't know you, because I don't expect you to start telling me your deepest, darkest secrets, or even just any vulnerable side of you after you've just met me. It's like awkward.
Yeah.
You know?
I lived in Nashville for a few years and spent a lot of time there before too. And being in writing sessions there where it's like just
in and out.
I have like 3 writing sessions a day. It's crazy. I like developed this weird ability to spill my guts to strangers, and,
which is amazing because I've gotten better at that too, especially since I've gotten older. But like when I was a young artist, that was very difficult for me to do. And maybe that's where all this comes from. It's like my own thing of when I was, first coming up and just being thrown into these rooms where it's like, okay, I'm like really nervous and anxious about everything. And I just want to feel comfortable.
Totally. So we've talked a lot about how you go about taking care of the artist and making sure that they are comfortable and their holistic well-being is prioritized. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. How do you take care of yourself in the process of making a record? Whether it's getting enough sleep, making sure you're nourishing yourself, taking breaks, and like expressing your needs throughout the process, and not just like taking care of the other person.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's something I've kind of only figured out recently as boundaries, because my whole thing is like 24/7 I'm on. There's no shutting off. And I don't know if this is a pandemic thing or just a getting older thing, but I find I'm just not as good without having a shut off period. Like I used to be able to plow through all that. And so now, unless it's absolutely necessary, like I try not to pull all-nighters. I try to get a good night's rest, and also just honoring my natural rhythm in the creative process as well, because I think like when you start to do this for a living, it kind of has to become an on-demand thing. Like even if you're having an off day, you can have an off day, but it is expected that you're going to deliver something. So I really try to be conscious about filling that well up as much as I can. So getting inspiration, taking yourself out on artist dates, or like if there's any kind of ritual that is important to your artistic spirit to do, which I personally have found very difficult to adhere to in the last 2 years, because I'm working out of my house. My studio's now moved into my house. I'm on the screen all day. I go and eat, and then I putter back into this room, and it's like, it's not a great boundary. I'm starting to have that again. But yeah, creating that space, and also not fighting your natural rhythm. Like for years, I've been trying to be that person that wakes up at 6 a.m. and that works out and that answers all the emails. And I'm like in the studio by 8, and it's not who I am. Like I had to just accept that. So I'm the person that needs to sit in bed and process the dreams that I just had, and like go through my emails slowly before I even get out of bed. And then I need to make my coffee. And so like following that natural rhythm where I can kind of warm up into my day and what I have to do and kind of process that before I'm in it has been really integral to maintaining process. Because it's one thing like to just do it whenever, but I think it is a marathon. Like you can't sprint your way through every single thing. It's like gonna be chaos, and the creative spirit is already chaotic. Right?
Totally. Do you find it difficult at times to communicate those needs and boundaries to artists, or have you just been like, this is how I work? These are the hours I can work?
I've never really had that issue, to be honest, because I think that because of that time that we take, like to get to know each other in our processes, like I think we just naturally go into the rhythm of what's necessary. And for me, I'm not very rigid about my approach to a record, because I do think it's really important as producers to be adaptable and not impose our will on the artist, because you want the artist to be comfortable. So I don't really have any dissonance around that or anything. And I think from the get-go, like when we make our schedule, we just make it and we stick to it. And a lot of the time it is fluid, because in my experience anyway, every single record that I've done has never started and ended when they said it would, right? Like,
Yeah.
because it really ultimately comes
It's a
down
tall
to the
order to
process.
stick to the schedule.
So for me, I'm like, let's sketch this in and try to adhere to it, you know. And obviously, if there are deadlines to meet, if you need your master submitted by this date, then we're going to make it happen, come hell or high water, you know. But for the most part, being open to the exploration that needs to happen, I think, when you're going through and trying to figure out that record, because as I said, like, we go in with a template, even with the palette, but when you actually start to put that into practice and manifest it, then you're going to find, okay, certain things work and certain things don't work. So it takes a minute to find that rhythm, right, and find out what that record is going to be. So yeah, I feel like if that respect and understanding and a communication is established from the get-go, then it's very easy to communicate and be kind of like fluid within that process, I feel.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. I've needed some advice on, taking care of myself in the process lately.
And it is, I think, but yeah, having your boundaries and knowing like when you need to fill up and all that stuff. Because that's the thing. If it is a big responsibility to be the producer on a project. You're kind of overseeing the entire process, right? And you're connecting all the dots. And I think it's important to have that time to rest your brain and your ears. Like now I do not send mixes out if I've been working all day. Yeah. Like I'm going to wait till the morning and have a listen to this, because I know it's going to sound different after my ears are dead, you know? And so stuff like that, especially, I think is like really important.
Yeah. I just did that the other day. I was mixing a song all day, and then I drove home. That was 10 minutes. Got home, made some tea. It was like half an hour since I left the studio, and I listened to it and I was like, oh my God, it's garbage. But I was just really tired. It sounded fine.
I always find, if you're doing it for that long, like sometimes it's better to just walk away. Yeah. And that's what I've noticed is I used to do the same thing where I'd be in the space and just keep trying, even though things weren't sounding right to me, you know, I'd just keep trying and I'd keep trying, and it always ends up just not going anywhere better when I'm in that type of a headspace. So I've learned to just kind of walk away, even if it's for a couple of hours, just go and take a break and then come back at it. Cause that change in perspective, even just having the change in perspective for your ears of going outside and listening to something far away and being like, oh, there's a perspective change. I'm like, cause you mess up like your sense of depth sometimes, like sitting in front of and mixing with low volume was something that started to really save me. Cause I always wanted to crank stuff. Because you just so excited
I've
about
learned
it.
to save the crank as like a special treat.
Exactly. At the very end of the day when you're bouncing, just
good
crank
now.
Boom.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's your favorite piece of gear in your studio? It doesn't have to be the one you use the most. It can just
I'm looking around because I got some new toys recently. Nice. Okay, so since the pandemic happened, I moved my studio into my living space. And since I've been working more at my place and less at studios, I decided to up my outboard gear game at home. And so that's been the last few years, like collecting more outboard gear. And I just got this preamp at the end of the year by Acme called the MTP 66. And it's a tube preamp. From and it's actually based on the original schematics of the tube pre's at Motown Studios. Cool. So what's really exciting about that piece of gear is, I don't know about you, but like when I'm trying to find a sound, I spend hours trying to do it. But with some sounds, especially for the old school kind of like vintage sounds, you can get there with plugins, but it takes like a while to make it sound legit. Yep. And I found with that, and this is why I was like, this is a bit pricey, but what am I gaining from investing in it? And it's saving time, because instead of spending hours trying to figure that out on the back end, I can get it going in through the recording process. And yeah, so this preamp's great because I can do guitar and bass directly through it. It has a DI. And there's also a mic input on it, so you can also record vocals. And what's really awesome about it is that there's no phantom power on it, because they really want to stay true to the essence of those recordings. Cool. Where nobody was using solid state mics back then, right? It was all tube and ribbon mics. So yeah, so I could only use tube and ribbon mics through it, and it's really exciting. I adore it.
That's really cool. Yeah, there is something very special about real analog gear, about the circuitry. You know, plugins get so close. It's remarkable how close they get now.
Especially those UA plugins. Like those are the main
Big
plugins
time.
I mix with, because especially for like the Pultec EQs and stuff,
Yeah.
it's really hard to get that really warm tube sound. And even their Manly stuff, like a lot of my friends that actually have a lot of the like original Manly gear, a lot of them can't tell the difference between the UA plugins. I have like one Manly piece of gear, but it's not 100% tube. It's the New Mew, which is like solid state on one end and then tube on the other end of it. And it's a great compressor, and it's really great because it's great for contemporaries. Like I work on a lot of different genres, so I try to choose pieces of gear that are versatile, because if I like try to stick to a solely, as much as I love tubes and I wouldn't want like tube everything, it doesn't always work for pop music, right? Like you need
it doesn't have that brightness that you need sometimes.
Yeah, or just that punch, that smack, right? So I think like as much as I love the tubes, you know, having non-tube stuff is also awesome. But yeah, there's a beautiful quality. I like to call them ghosts when you're using analog gear. There's like those harmonics that kind of fill spaces that you can't always get through plugins, because sometimes they could come off as harsh or thin.
Just like I love the way they breathe, especially like compressors, when you just get them dialed just right. It's like
in that right spot. Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, it can change everything. And it's funny because I got my first tube compressor in my place in the summer, and it's actually an Acme Audio one as well. It's their Opticom compressor, and that compressor is crazy. It's pretty much like an LA2A style compressor, but you have like 3 release modes on it. So you could get super gritty, or you could get that silky sound off of it as well.
Awesome.
And anytime I was like having an issue of making something pop in the mix, I'd literally just run it through the Opticom, and then it would be perfect. It would like sit in that space where I wanted to. So yeah, and that's something that I wouldn't have been able to achieve if I didn't have that hybrid setup, right?
Yeah. Cool. When did you start to, like, in your mind, justifying buying Outboard gear? This is something that I battle with myself all the time.
I know, well, because that's the thing. If you're working out of really amazing studios that have all that stuff, it's like you can kind of do what you need to do from home and then go get what you need to do from the studios, which have all that gear, right? For me, it was really the pandemic. Like I had a few preamps and stuff that I had at home kicking around, but I wasn't really in the game of like buying compressors and stuff until recently for my home setup. I knew what I liked because I'd been using that gear for so long in other spaces. But I think it's honestly a great investment, especially if you're going to start doing more projects from home. It just gives you more independence. And I found, especially when I started mixing more on my home setup, there was always something kind of missing, especially when I was working on those more kind of rootsy oriented records, you know, that again, plugins can do a great job and I think they're amazing and I still do use them, but having nothing beats that analog sound with some things, especially when it comes to a mix and creating that dimension, I think.
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for. I was like, why can't I think of the word dimension? But it was depth and dimension, right? It's like I think of a mix as a room, and rooms have walls and floors and ceilings, and like trying to find everything space within that space, I think is like awesome. And sometimes when you're using solely digital plugins, that space feels a bit reduced, like in a way, because there's, I don't know. You need, I think, as many flavors as you can involve as possible is what enhances that environment.
Awesome. So I just want to take a moment to tell people who might be watching this, if you have any questions, now is the time to start asking. We have like 20 minutes left, and I'd love to get some questions answered if you have them. What is the best piece of advice you've been given, or best piece of advice that you might have for people looking to get into production, engineering, mixing? I
was trying to think of something that like might not have been said. I don't know. These were the 2 greatest things that I'll say 3 greatest things that I've learned. And that is to dive in without overthinking it, because there is no right time to start anything, is what I've discovered. And taking that leap on yourself is the best thing that you can do, you know? And the sooner that you can do that, and piece of advice number 2, the sooner that you can focus on what it is that you want to do, the faster you'll be able to build it up. You know, like I mentioned earlier, I was doing all of these different things, which I don't regret doing. But because I think they've all informed what I'm doing now. But the minute that I decided to focus was the minute I truly was able to flourish and do what I wanted to do authentically, if that makes any sense.
Fantastic. I'm going to remember that.
And the last thing too is like I said earlier, they're finding what your contribution can be in the capacity of a producer. And I don't want to call it branding, because it's not branding in the commercial sense, but if you can figure out what your production style is, I think that helps you manifest the projects that you want to align with and work with when you have that clarity for yourself as well. So, and that kind of falls under the focus thing too. Because otherwise it's like, don't overthink it, just have fun with it, you know?
That's awesome. How do you get over, or if you experience this, actually, I shouldn't assume. I assume everybody does, but maybe not. How do you deal with imposter syndrome?
I'm the queen of imposter syndrome. That's a hard one. You know, what's funny is I thought that only I felt that way. And then I started to talk to more female and non-binary and trans producers, and they're like, oh, I feel that way too. And then I started to talk to my guy friend producers that like I never talked to about that stuff, because I would just try to geek out about gear whenever I talked to them. And they feel that way too, I discovered.
Oh, that's so funny.
So I think we're all on the same boat there. That's the great equalizer, is imposter syndrome. I think it's important to have humility and realize that we're never, ever going to know everything.
Yeah.
And as much as we would like to do that, especially in spaces where we might feel insecure, which I'm sure we all walk into spaces all the time and feel insecure on some level.
Yeah.
It's just to remember that if you're in that space, you're meant to be there, period. You know? And I think it's also important to not try to walk into spaces knowing everything and being open to learning, you know, because as I mentioned to you earlier, before we got into this conversation, I am where I am today because of mentorships and because I sat in spaces and I observed people, or people shared knowledge with me, you know, and all of those little techniques and pieces of information I held on to and I put into a bag of tricks, and now it's my bag of tricks that I can draw from, you know? And so I think if we remind ourselves that we are all continuously learning, because every project I'm learning on, I've made a lot of records now, and I thought I would be more comfortable the more records I did. And to be completely transparent, there is a moment before I start every project where I'm terrified that I'm going to screw it up. Like,
it's really good to know.
I think that that's normal though, because I think that that shows that you care. I think it was Steven Spielberg that said this shit. He's like the most, you know, successful producer and director out there, writer, whatever. He does everything. And he even said, like, the day that I stop getting nervous before a project is the day I quit. And I'm like, that's actually a good bar to say, you know?
Yeah.
Because I don't think you should be comfortable going into these things, because it is an unknown adventure. It's like going into any other transition in one's life. Like, you don't know what's ahead. And so you have to just go all in, you know, and just trust the journey, trust yourself, and be open. And that's the best thing we can do. So, and then just remind yourself that everyone else feels that way. Like, nobody's figured it out.
Totally. How do you know when it's done? Whether it's the production process or the mix, or like getting sounds in the, just like when you're first starting out, or like starting the process of, like, I don't know, getting drum sounds or whatever. It's like, how
the production process is not done till we feel it's done. And usually my marker for that part before we transition into mix, because they are two distinct things. Like, I think of production as the fluid part, right? And that's where we need to get all the ideas out without censoring them, you know, or judging them. And that's a constant flux, right? Until we get to that point. And usually it's when I listen to something and I don't get distracted by that feels like it's missing something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I might hear, oh, the elements are there, that's a mix thing. But if I feel like an integral part of the arc of the production is missing, like that's just something you intuitively know. Like, does this still feel like it's a demo, or does this feel like a complete idea now?
Mm-hmm.
That's when I know it's done production wise. Now for the mix, and when I know I want to sign off on a mix, it's when I can listen back and not be distracted by anything.
Cool.
And I think that it is important to remember that all of this stuff is relative. So depending on where you're going to be in your life, even 5 years down the road, you might look back and say, oh, in hindsight, now that I know what I know now, I would have done that differently. Absolutely. So it's never about being 100% satisfied, because that is even like an hourly thing, right? You can flex and be like, totally. I feel good about this. But it's, do I feel like this is the truest representation of what we set out to do right now? Is this representative of who the artist is right now? Is the artist happy? And does it sound good without me thinking something's poking out or something doesn't fit? If all those answers are greenlit, then it's okay, we're ready to move on from it. We all feel good about it, you know?
Awesome. That's great. Sweet. Isabella, do we have any questions from the audience? Let's see if any pop up.
What are your favorite
Not
plugins?
a good. What are my favorite plugins?
Just talk about plugins.
So I don't know. This isn't like a favorite plugin, but it's a favorite tool I've been using lately to save myself a lot of time. So I get really, really microscopic about like volume automation, especially on vocals. Because I really, really love those like tiny moments in a phrase, and I want to hear them. So I'm always just like going in microscopically and bringing those out. So I've been really enjoying using like currently MV2 for upwards compression and just like making the quiet louder, which does like probably at least half of what I would do anyways, all in one shot.
So
and then
it
I
brings
can go
you
in
closer,
and just like, so that's been a fun tool lately.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I've been really lucky to be working at an amazing studio called No Fun Club here in Winnipeg. And they have just the most amazing collection of outboard gear. And so it's been really fun to learn about all of the analog gear too. And hearing the differences. We have a question. Okay, from Tiffany. When you experience imposter syndrome, how do you get out of your way to even begin participating? I have always worked on my own because I'm frankly afraid of putting myself out there to work with others.
Yeah, that's a big one. I can only speak to my experience, so I'll tell you what I've done. I don't know if this will resonate at all, but for me, there's always a motivator to survive a fear, like just a natural human response, right? And for me, the fear of failing outweighs everything. So even if I'm going into something and don't know what the hell I'm doing, which I've done quite a few times. That's honestly how I've gotten most of my first gig of anything. I was asked to do something I'd never done before. And I'm like, I'm going to do this. And I say yes. And then I said, okay, now I've said yes and I can't fail. And so it's almost like this trick I play with myself. So I commit first and then I need to follow through because that's how my ego works, is that I don't want to be like an irresponsible, flaky person. Same. So then I'm like, the only option is to just figure it out and to not fail. And that's what really kicks my ass into gear with that stuff. And that's what works for me. And honestly, it hasn't gotten, I'm going to be completely honest with you, it has not gotten easier. Like I had a panic attack the other day over something, you know, it happens all the time for me because I'm just an anxious person that cares too much, you know? Yeah. But I think it's important to not work against your personality. I think that we're conditioned in our culture to just constantly work against our personality or like bury it. And over the years, I've tried to learn how to work with my personality. Like there are positive aspects of these things that I used to look at as weaknesses or whatever. and there's a way to foster yourself through those things. Like, obviously don't put yourself in a completely uncomfortable situation, but it's normal for things to be uncomfortable, honestly, especially if it's a first
things.
Every new thing. And that's why I'm saying, like, even though I can produce hundreds of records, it's still going to feel like a brand new thing I've never done every time I go into it, because that specific project is brand new. But that first step is really hard. So I'd say just try to dive in. And I don't know if you're referring to imposter syndrome with production projects specifically, or if it's songwriting as well, but I would even just maybe start with songwriting initially and just starting to co-write, because that was one of the most valuable career growths that I ever had, was starting to co-write with people. I was really precious when I first started writing songs about my songs, and I wanted to be my words. And it wasn't until I started writing with others that I really started to learn about refining that skill. And it's the same with production. So I think there's so much value in collaboration. Like, we can't make records on our own. We can't do we can do things on our own, but really true magic happens when teams of people come together, right? And we're all bouncing energy off of each other to make the best possible thing we can make. So yeah, I would just try to stay open to those experiences, because as scary as they are, the benefits of them, I think, outweigh that.
Yeah. Hey, from Tyler Del Pino. Is it possible to get a great mix without any outboard gear?
Of course. I know a lot of mixers that are completely in box. And I think just as you find your style as a producer, finding your style as a mixer is a thing too, because there is no standard when it comes to mixing. When I first got into mixing, I was daunted by it, because I thought every legit mixer mixed with a console.
Yeah, and had like racks of like full size outboard gear.
Yeah, and that's not the case, especially nowadays. Like, it doesn't make sense to have to recall a million analog processes. So I don't always do analog mixing. I did find that my mixes did change when I started putting analog chains just on my mix bus. That just added a really beautiful finish, because I did find that there was a certain harmonic space spectrum that was missing from things that I wanted to hear.
What's your like go-to piece of gear or chain for that piece?
So I have an SSL Fusion on my mix bus. That's like kind of the main thing. And I will chain a stereo compressor to it as well. Like, there's an insert on that compressor or it's not a compressor, the SSL Fusion. It's like, it's EQs and it's essentially like a mastering signal chain.
Cool.
In one that kind of creates like, you can play more with depth. You can, filter out certain frequencies. You can add that harmonic distortion into it. So it creates that signal path for you. And then there's an insert where you could use the SSL on its own, or you can, throw another compressor or an EQ or anything. I usually use my Manly New there, but for a lot of the new Digging Roots record, I actually used Raven's Thermionic Culture, the Phoenix, which is like a crazy valve compressor, stereo valve compressor. It sounds so amazing. Awesome. I totally want it. Like, I want it so bad. It sounds so good. And that was the compressor we used on the mix bus with the SSL Fusion, and it was awesome. But you don't need it. Like, I even use, as I was saying, the UA plugins are great, and I change up my chains all the time depending on what phase I'm in, like that month. But right now I'm, doing the Manly Massive Passive with like a Varimu, and then I add a limiter on the end of it just for listening. And when I'm doing a lot of pop mixes, like, I'll generally stay in box because I'm doing a million different tweaks. I usually stick to the analog stuff for when I'm mixing an album, and I want to create that cohesion from track to track. That's awesome. But I think hybrid is the way to go. Like, it doesn't make sense to solely stick to one thing, especially with recalls, because it's insane to do, especially if you have a huge project load. Yeah. But yeah, to answer your question, Tyler, the answer is yes from Hill. It's possible. And also, Tyler, I've heard your mixes. They're great. They are really great. They really are. So we have like 5 minutes left. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you really want to talk about? I'm not sure. I think we've covered like some pretty good topics.
Yeah. What's your what's your favorite thing of all the things that you are capable of doing? You know, being a musician, songwriter, engineer, mixer, producer, film director,
This is really
composer.
hard because a lot of the things, I guess I'll say production, and it's a bit of a cop-out answer because I can combine all those other things.
Of course.
Under the
No, that's
umbrella.
fine.
Because that's, I think, the exhilarating part of it. Like, for me, the whole purpose of living is to be creative, right? I think we're all born creators in this world, and we're just trying to forge our paths and find our way. And I think it's important to exercise that will freely, you know? And so if you can find that through many forms of expression, that's what keeps me motivated and happy, and also switches it up, you know, so that you're not doing the same thing. I think that like sitting on the edge of your seat feeling, as scary as it is, I think is so important to just keeping you open to the experiences ahead. Right.
Totally. Yeah, the fear is real, but it's awesome in the end.
So real. Well, especially when there's so much pressure to deliver, right? Like when it's a job, and as much as your job is your passion, you still have like that responsibility to deliver something. And so another thing that I found really helpful when you're talking about that self-care aspect actually is like finding other modes of creativity with no expectation attached to them has been really huge for me. And then I've started finding that in like the weirdest little things, like cooking. I'm like, that's my free creative time where I can do whatever the hell I want. And it's like, and I have no expectation out of it. So it just brings me joy. And I think it's like, it's fun to explore all those different aspects of your creativity, I think, because they do inform each other.
That's awesome. Yeah. Any last questions from the?
I don't think so.
No, doesn't look like it.
Cool. I think
well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It was really nice to finally connect with you. Like we've almost crossed paths for many years, and we've worked remotely together, and this was just really lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you as well. And thanks for having me. Thanks, Manitoba Music.
Yeah, very much. Thank you, Manitoba Music. Amazing supporter for our community, and for having this speaker series. It's I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed tonight, especially.
Yeah, me too. And I'm looking forward to next week as well.
Same. Awesome. Thanks.